So I heard that the topic that they titled this presentation was 4 generations in the workplace, but newsflash, we are actually now 5 generations in the workplace. So while you were sitting here at the Aging Up Atlanta conference, we are already to the 5th generation in the workplace. This is the headline from 2019. We are the traditionalists, the baby boomers, the Gen Xers, the millennials, and the Gen Zs. This is not something that happens every couple of years. This is the first time in our country's history that we have 5 distinct generations in the workplace together. I spent about the first 10 years of my research and work studying millennials, and millennials are tremendously important. They are the largest generation in the workplace. You've heard a lot from millennials today, but all of the rest of us are here too. And what I want to talk about today is the mix of those 5 generations. This is the chart from Pew Research Center of how we got here. I myself am a Gen Xer. I started in the workplace in the 1990s, and back in the 90s, this is a chart of the last 25 years, not of our whole population, but of work. There were 3 generations in the workplace around me, and it was this really easy story. There were Xers who were at the beginning of our careers. There were boomers who were at the height of their careers at the top, and there were traditionalists, or the silent generation, who were retiring out of the workplace, beginning, middle, end. It made a lot of sense. But what started to happen is that picture changed. You can see that skyrocketing line of millennials. Millennials came into the workplace and rose to become the largest generation significantly faster than anybody else started leaving the workplace. So that line goes up much faster than any other line goes down. The post-millennials, or Gen Zs, born in 1997 and later, are just starting to come in. So we've gone from this really easy picture to a much more complex portrait. And it's not because young people have come into the workplace. Young people have come into the workplace every year for all time. The reason we are a 5-generation workplace today going into 2020 is because people are working longer and later into their lives. There are more Americans age 85 and older in the United States workplace today than ever before in American history. 85 and older. Look at the Democratic primary for president of our country, the top leadership job. We have the largest range of candidates in our country's history. Who's the youngest? Mayor Pete, but no one wants to pronounce it. Mayor Pete, 37 years old, the first ever millennial to run, 37 years old. Who's the oldest? Bernie Sanders, 78 years old. We have situations in the workplace today that have never happened before. You have 2 people, 4 decades apart in age, essentially applying for the same job. We've never had that before. So it's not that the unprecedented nature of the workplace is unsolvable or is terrible. I think it's the greatest opportunity we have. But in order to succeed in this environment, however you approach it, you have to think about all of those generations. Here's another unprecedented fact that we're facing. Occasionally, people used to have a boss who was younger, but today 38% of Americans work for a boss who is younger than they are. These are situations we now have to plan for. These are situations that we now need to teach people how to deal with. One of the reasons I love applying generations to the workplace is it's one of the areas where we don't have a lot of choice of who we spend time with. We're thrown into work with whoever happens to be there, and we have to figure out ways to succeed. So all of this then leads to the question, so what? Why does age matter? And I get this question a lot. Doesn't matter, it's a state of mind. What I want to suggest is the way to approach this topic in your career is that we are all more alike than we are different. I deeply believe that. We are more alike than we are different. But your generation, the point at which you first step foot in the workplace, impacts your expectations about what that workplace will look like. Who will you be working with? What technologies will be available to you? How long of a career do you think that you will have? It's not that we are different deep down inside. The issue is what we expect to be the norm in our workplace. I'll give you a technology example. Saying to a Gen Z, a 22-year-old walking into your workplace, "Oh, we don't allow social media here," is like saying to a baby boomer, "We don't have electricity in our office." It is that shocking and unbelievable to walk into that environment. So I want to give you a couple more examples. These are facts, not judgments. We are now a more diverse society and workplace than ever before. This is the year, this is the tipping point in our country, where in public schools, we are now majority non-white students. So any Gen Z coming up in the school system today is going to have an experience that is significantly more racially diverse than any other generation. So if they walk into your company or they see your website and it's not diverse, there is going to be a disconnect there from every other experience they've had. How about a stat like driver's licenses? How many of you, like me, were at the DMV the minute you turned 16? The minute. Why? Why? Why did you want your driver's license so bad? Freedom. See my friends get out of the house. Why has there been a 50% drop in 16-year-olds getting driver's licenses? Uber, Lyft, they can't afford it. What else? I don't have to leave my house to socialize. I don't have to leave my house to see my friends, to flirt, to date. I can play Fortnite. I can go on Instagram. I can FaceTime. I don't need to leave my home. What does that mean? How many of you hire or work with entry-level talent? Anyone 25 and younger? So those young people have literally clocked fewer hours talking to other human beings than any generation in human history. I don't say that as a judgment, I say it as a fact. So when they walk into your work environment and they have trouble interviewing for a job, it is not a sign of intelligence or lack of desire or passion for the work. It's, I have literally spent less time talking to other people than you have. And that is simply the world I was born into. It's not my fault or a choice, it's an expectation change. How about retirement? We've talked a lot about that today. If you are a traditionalist or a baby boomer, about 52% of you had a job with a retirement plan. You could retire at, quote, traditional retirement age. If you are a Gen Xer like me, about 21% chance. If you are a millennial or a Gen Z, there's only about a 14% chance that you have any kind of retirement savings. Don't say the word retirement to a millennial or a Gen Z. It doesn't have the same meaning. Don't ask a young person why they're not loyal to your company and want to work there forever, because there is no mechanism anymore for the company to be loyal to them. These are just facts of when you entered the workplace, what was available to you. And here's a more sociographic, psychographic statistic. 71% of people today, in 2019, 65 and older, believe that you can trust the average person you run into, the average stranger. Well, that number goes down by every generation. So if you are a Gen Xer, you're about 50-50 on whether you trust the average person. If you are a millennial or a Gen Z, you're only about 40% likely to trust a person that you meet. This impacts job interviewing. This impacts manager-managed relationships. I had a guy who owned a summer camp, and he said to me, I feel like these teenagers walk in to come and apply for jobs, and they just don't trust me. They don't think I have their best interests at heart. What am I doing wrong? And the answer was, you're probably not doing anything wrong, but that's now the baseline level of trust between people. So all of these statistics add up to say that we can no longer agree on what, quote, common sense is. I love this quotation. It's very helpful in your personal life as well, that common sense is not so common. We're all human beings, but what we expect the world to be like, what we expect our relationships and our work to be like, really depends on what we have grown up with. So what do we do about it? I wrote a book about it. It's called The Remix. The Remix is my attempt to come up with solutions for bringing together all of these disparate experiences. And it's based, of course, on a remix in music, which we're all familiar with, which is the idea that you take a classic song and you mix in or alter it in some way to make it more modern. And what's really important is you don't say that the old song is wrong or bad or old-fashioned and should retire. It's simply about making it more modern. And are there any DJs or music producers in the room? The CEO of Goldman Sachs is a DJ, so it's not a crazy question to ask at a conference, right? Okay, so I interviewed a bunch of DJs and music producers when I picked this title because I didn't want to use it and not know what I was talking about. And one DJ said to me that she has a little trick of DJing. If you're at a party or a wedding or a bar mitzvah and the dance floor is empty, she said the trick is to play a remix. Because the older people at the party recognize the classic and say, I know that song, and they come and dance. And the younger people recognize the remix and they say, I know that song, and they come and dance. So the solution to a 5-generation workplace is not either or, we do it the millennial way or we do it the boomer way. It's always about and. How do we bring everybody together? So here are 3 examples of remixes. The first is who we recruit. Another stat that has changed over time is that teenagers rarely work for pay in the summer anymore. Most kids are doing more educational programs or trying to get to college because more young people go to college. This has been a real challenge for the lifeguarding industry because they don't have enough teenagers applying for positions. So one pool and beach club in Galveston, Texas said, look, who made a law that you have to be a teenager to be a lifeguard? We've been doing it for generations, but maybe there's another way. And they looked around and said, who really comes and swims here every day? It's the people over 50 who want a low-impact exercise that doesn't hurt their knees. And so they started putting up posters saying, do you want to turn your passion into a career? Lo and behold, their entire lifeguarding staff became people over 55, including the #1 ranked most popular lifeguard, who is 83 years old, and is beloved at the pool for lifeguarding. If you can do the job and you can learn how to do it, why can't we change our definitions of who can fill what positions? The head of the pool in Galveston also said, given the earlier stat that I shared with you, that the side benefit of having retired lifeguards is that they can drive themselves to work. Remix number 2, where do we have the biggest challenges when it comes to 5-generation workplaces? It's how we communicate with each other, because it's no longer just about what we say to each other, it's about what devices we choose to use. 81% of people say the biggest challenge of this mix is how do we talk to each other. The simple remix here is to not look for the one way that everybody wants to communicate. There isn't one. It depends on your personality. It depends on the work that you do. It depends on your personal preferences. So the solution here is to simply get in the habit of asking everyone you work with, how do you like to communicate? What's the best way to get in touch with you? What's your preference on devices or formality? May I text you or not? Is it okay to DM you on Instagram? What are your preferences? Michael Watkins of Harvard Business School calls this the style conversation. So if you have a boss that you are having trouble communicating with, try asking, what's the best way to communicate with you? Any pet peeves I should know about? And if you are a manager of other people, it's an act of generosity to say, here's how to do work with me. I met a small business owner who said at his company, everybody has a personal user manual. And when you start to work with them, they say, here, these are my preferences. This is how we can do business together. Simple solution for a complex situation. And finally, the third remix I'd like to share with you is around mentoring. And mentoring is such an example of a classic practice that should never go out of style. There is nothing old-fashioned or outdated about mentoring. But the concept of an older gray-haired person giving life advice to a junior up-and-comer is somewhat outdated. In a 5-generation workplace and also a 5-generation marketplace of customers, you have to be connected to all generations. Mentoring needs to go in both directions now. The concept is called reverse mentoring or co-mentoring. One really great example is Fabrizio Freda, who's the CEO of Estee Lauder Companies. Fabrizio Freda has been in the cosmetics industry for decades. He is one of the most admired CEOs in the world. Fabrizio Freda has a 23-year-old mentor who is a junior employee at Estee Lauder. Once a quarter, she takes him shopping for makeup around New York City. Best job ever. So it's not, let's sit across the table from each other and talk. It's let's go have an experience together and see how we approach it differently. Smaller example, I worked with a manager who walked into his company every Monday and said to the youngest person on his team, can you put a new app on my phone? I want to use what you're using. Where can you fill your thinking and your experience with the perspectives of other generations? This is a group with the Atlantic. I know that you're all overachievers and very intellectual. So the leveling up of this co-mentoring is to think of yourself as having a multi-generational board of advisors. What if you had a person from each generation who was advising you on how to look at the world and how to think about your job and your career? Couple of homework assignments for you. I know that's been popular this morning. Number one, next time you form a committee, a team, a volunteer activity, make sure that you have every one of the 5 generations represented. So often as a consultant, I walk into a company and they say, can you tell us what our millennials are thinking? And I always respond, did you ask them? And it hasn't occurred to people to do that. Make sure you get every perspective as often as possible. By the way, you're all experts on this. You've all done this before because every family is multi-generational. We know how to do this. We have to apply it to work. Number 2, make no assumptions. I have so many baby boomers who say, can you tell millennials and Gen Zs that when they see my gray hair and glasses, it doesn't mean to talk loudly and slowly in order to communicate with me? And equally, millennials and Gen Zs say, can you please tell all of the other generations, I don't just want to text. I don't just want to Skype. I want to have in-person relationships. I want to build that. It's often not offered to me. Always ask, don't make assumptions. And third, can you challenge yourself to either create this multi-generational board of advisors or just as a small habit? I try to implement this myself. Whenever you sit at an event like this, when you go out to the lunch, don't go up to the person most like you. Go up and talk to the person most different from you. I did this recently on an Amtrak train. Anyone take Amtrak regularly? So I'm walking down the aisle and I see a lovely older woman knitting in her seat. And I ask, is this seat taken? And we start to chat, and I'm trying to put this in practice. And we got shushed relentlessly because it ended up being the quiet car. So don't do it there. Do it in a situation where it's appropriate. But try to build your own multi-generational muscle by having conversations you might not have before. I want to thank you for inviting me to speak today. Thank you for the Atlantic. I've put together a list of resources to you. And if your board needs a Gen Xer, I am available. Thank you very much.